While I was teaching teenagers about loyalty and integrity, my wife was in hotel rooms practicing the opposite. That's the thought that haunts me now, though I didn't know it then. My name is Marcus Hale, and at 35, I'd built a life I thought was solid, structured, predictable, dependable. I'm a high school chemistry teacher and debate coach, the kind of guy who thrives on routine. My days are filled with lesson plans, lab experiments, and coaching kids to argue with logic and heart. It's a life I love, a fortress I've constructed out of discipline and purpose. But every fortress has its weak spots, and mine, it turns out, was closer than I ever imagined. That morning started like any other. I stood at the front of my classroom, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the periodic table pinned to the wall behind me like a map of everything I believe in: order, balance, predictability. My students, a mix of juniors and seniors, were hunched over their desks, some scribbling notes, others staring blankly at the whiteboard. I was midway through a lesson on chemical reactions, my chalk tapping the board as I drew an equation. Take sodium and chlorine, I said, my voice steady, practiced. Two elements, stable on their own, but put them together, and you get sodium chloride, table salt. It's a bond that changes them both, makes them something stronger. That's what reactions are about, transformation through connection. A hand shot up near the back. It was Jamie, a sharp kid who always had a question ready. Mr. Hale, does that work for people too? Like, do we change when we connect with someone? I paused, chalk hovering midair. In a way, yeah, I said, offering a small smile. Relationships can transform us, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. It depends on what each person brings to the mix. Trust, loyalty, communication, those are the elements that matter. The class nodded, a few jotting down my words like they were gospel. I've always liked that about teaching, seeing those lightbulb moments, knowing I'm shaping how they see the world. It's why I stay late to coach the debate team, why I spend hours tweaking lesson plans. My students respect me, and I take pride in that. It's a quiet kind of pride, not flashy, but deep. I'm not the loudest guy in the room, but I'm the one they turn to when they need steady ground. The bell rang, snapping me out of my rhythm. Chairs scraped against the linoleum as the kids packed up, a few lingering to chat. Mr. Hale, you coming to the debate practice tonight? One of them asked, a sophomore named Alex, all nervous energy and big ideas. Wouldn't miss it, I said, clapping him on the shoulder. Bring your A game, all right? He grinned and darted off, leaving me to gather my things. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I headed for the door, a text from Emily, my wife. Late night at work again. Don't wait up. Love you. I stared at the screen for a second longer than usual. She'd been sending messages like that a lot lately, short, clipped, routine. I typed back, okay, love you too, and slid the phone away, ignoring the faint tug in my chest. Emily's a social media strategist, works remotely for some skincare brand I can never quite keep straight. She's 33, vibrant in a way I've never been, always quick with a laugh, intuitive about people, the kind of person who lights up a room without trying. We've been married 7 years, and I've always thought we balanced each other out, my steadiness, her spark. Lately, though, that spark felt distant, like a candle flickering just out of reach. I brushed it off. Work stress, I told myself. She'd been buried in campaigns, Zoom calls, deadlines. It made sense. By the time I got home, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles into your bones. Emily's absence wasn't new, she'd been staying late at her office, our spare bedroom, or meeting clients more often, but it hit me harder that night. I dropped my bag by the door, loosened my tie, and headed to the kitchen to heat up leftovers. Her laptop sat open on the counter, which was odd, she usually kept it locked away. I reached to close it, more out of habit than anything, when a notification pinged on the screen. A message preview, Theo, can't wait for our next meeting. I froze, my hand hovering over the lid. Theo? I didn't know a Theo. And that winky face, it didn't sit right. My mind raced for an explanation. A coworker, maybe? Someone from her team? Emily worked with all kinds of people, consultants, influencers, creatives. It could be harmless. But something about it gnawed at me, a tiny splinter I couldn't pull out. I closed the laptop, harder than I meant to, and turned away. I wasn't the type to snoop. Trust was trust, right? Over the next few days, though, I couldn't unsee it. Little things started stacking up, pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Emily dressing up for her Zoom calls, nothing crazy, just a bit more effort than usual, a swipe of lipstick, a blouse instead of her usual sweatshirt. She'd angle her laptop away from the hallway when I passed by, her voice dropping low. Once, I caught her giggling at a text, her fingers flying across the screen. "Work stuff," she said when I asked, her smile tight. I nodded, let it go. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband, the one who doubts everything. But then there was the necklace. I found it one evening while putting away laundry. It was in her gym bag, tucked into a side pocket, a small silver pendant, simple but unfamiliar. I held it up to the light, turning it over in my fingers. It wasn't hers. At least, I'd never seen her wear it. No note, no box, just this random piece of jewelry that didn't belong. My stomach twisted. A gift? From a friend? A client? I slipped it into my dresser drawer, telling myself I'd ask her about it later. I didn't. Days went by, and she never mentioned it. Neither did I. That night, after a long day of teaching and debate practice, I sat down at the dining table with my laptop, a stack of papers beside me. I was halfway through grading a pop quiz when an email popped up. It was from Alex, the sophomore from earlier. Subject: "Hey Mr. Hale, check this out." I clicked it, expecting a debate article or a meme, something typical. Instead, his message hit me like a punch. "Hey Mr. Hale, isn't this your wife? This is trending LOL." Attached was a screenshot, blurry but unmistakable. Emily, laughing, dancing with some guy in what looked like a fancy hotel suite. Around her neck, that silver pendant. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked the link he'd included, a TikTok video. There they were, her and this stranger, moving to some upbeat song, her arms around his neck, his hands on her waist. The caption read, "When work trips turn into something more #couple goals." Comments piled up below, fire emojis, heart eyes, people tagging friends. My hand shook as I scrolled. The guy, whoever he was, grinned at the camera, all confidence and charm. Emily looked alive, happier than I'd seen her in months. I closed the laptop, my chest tight, my mind spinning. This couldn't be real. There had to be an explanation, a work thing, a misunderstanding. But the necklace, the texts, the late nights, they all clicked into place, a reaction I couldn't stop. I didn't know who this guy was or what was happening, but one thing was clear: my life, my fortress, was cracking. And I had no idea what to do next. I sat at the dining table, my laptop open, its screen casting a dim light across the quiet room. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the fridge and the distant tick of a clock. My hands lingered over the keys, but I wasn't working. I couldn't. Not after what I'd seen. It started with a TikTok video a friend, Alex, had sent me, an offhand "Have you seen this?" with a laughing emoji. There was Emily, my wife, dancing with some guy named Theo in a sleek hotel suite. Her arms draped around his neck, his hands on her hips, and that silver pendant, the one I'd found tangled in her gym bag weeks ago, shone against her chest. The caption twisted the knife: "When work trips turn into something more #couple goals." It hit me like a freight train. My Emily, with another man, and the world watching. I scrubbed my hands over my face, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, some gimmick for her influencer gig. She was always filming, always on. But the way she laughed with him, the ease of his touch, it wasn't fake. It was intimate. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of the spiral. A text from Emily, running late again. Big project deadline. Don't wait up. Love you. Love you. The word stung, empty now. I didn't respond. Instead, I paced the room, my mind replaying every odd moment, the late nights, the vague excuses, that necklace. I couldn't just sit there. I needed answers, something solid to prove me wrong or right. I wasn't a snoop, never had been, but this was different. I headed to our bedroom, where her laptop sat on the nightstand, still plugged in from the morning. My hand hovered over it, guilt prickling at me. We'd always trusted each other. She'd given me her password years ago, a symbol of that trust. Now, it felt like a key to a door I didn't want to open. I typed it in anyway, my fingers shaky. Her desktop popped up, a mess of folders. I opened her email, scrolling past work stuff, campaigns, client notes, until I hit a thread labeled us. From Theo Granger. My pulse hammered as I clicked. The messages were short, flirty. Can't wait for our little escape again, one read. Another mentioned a special gift, the pendant. They were planning another business trip to some mountain resort. Each line carves deeper into me, undeniable proof piling up. Emily was cheating. My wife of 7 years was lying to my face. I shut the laptop, my hands trembling. Anger surged, hot and wild. I wanted to smash something, to call her out right then. But I stopped myself. Confronting her now would just spark denials or excuses. I needed more, needed to be sure of every detail. Back at my own laptop, I pulled up TikTok and found the video again. Thousands of views now, comments piling up. One stood out, "How long have you two been dating?" Theo's reply, "A few months now." Best decision I ever made. Months. This wasn't a fling. It was a whole other life she'd built behind my back. I couldn't stay in the house. Grabbing my keys, I bolted outside, the night air sharp against my skin. I walked with no direction, questions clawing at me. How had I not seen this? Was I too caught up in my teaching job, my routines? Maybe I'd let us drift. But that didn't justify her betrayal. Nothing did. A familiar voice broke my thoughts, Mrs. Peterson, a coworker, walking her yappy little dog. "Marcus. Out late, huh?" she said cheerfully. "Yeah, just clearing my head," I muttered, forcing a smile. "I saw your wife's latest video," she went on. "She's blowing up online. That dance with that guy, everyone's talking about it." My gut twisted. "Yeah, I saw it," I said, my tone clipped. "She's a star," she chirped, missing my tension. "You must be so proud." Proud. I nearly laughed. "Sure. Night, Mrs. Peterson." I walked off before she could say more. Even my coworkers knew. Back home, the rage had cooled into something sharper, more focused. Emily and Theo thought they could play me for a fool. They were wrong. I reopened my laptop and dug into Theo Granger, creative consultant, Instagram full of smug travel shots and hollow quotes. Then I found dirt, whispers of an NFT scam, shady deals tied to Emily's influencer network. Their affair wasn't just personal, it was tangled in his schemes. A plan took shape. I wouldn't just confront her, I'd expose them both, torch their perfect little world. Risky, sure, but I was past caring. I had nothing left to lose. When Emily got home, I was on the couch, a book open but unread. "Hey, babe," she said, dropping her bag. Work was insane. "I'm beat." "No problem," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "How was your day?" "Good, just long," she replied, kicking off her shoes. "Heading to bed." "Sleep well," I said, watching her. She kissed my cheek, and I fought not to flinch. Her touch was poison now. As she disappeared down the hall, I clenched my fists. This was far from over. Tomorrow, I'd start unraveling their lies. For now, I'd play the clueless husband one last time. I stood in the kitchen with the evidence I had collected spread across the dining table, a collection of screenshots, emails, and a TikTok video that exposed everything I had been too blind to see. The house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the steady ticking of the clock on the wall, each second stretching out as I waited for Emily to walk through the door. She would be home soon, and I had spent the day steeling myself for what was about to happen, knowing there was no way to avoid the conversation that would end everything I thought I knew about us. My hands rested on the edge of the table, gripping it tightly as I heard the front door creak open and the jingle of her keys landing in the bowl by the entrance. My pulse raced, a mix of fury and sickness churning in my stomach, but I kept my face still, ready for her to see me standing there. "Hey, babe," Emily said as she stepped into the kitchen, her tone bright and unbothered until she caught sight of me and the table, stopping dead in her tracks. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice faltering as her eyes flicked between my expression and the papers laid out in front of me. I didn't say anything at first, just pointed at the evidence with a slow, deliberate motion, letting her take it all in as her face went white and her breathing hitched. She stepped closer, her fingers hovering over an email printout, and I could see the recognition sinking in, the panic starting to build behind her eyes. "What is all this?" she whispered, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it over the hum of the appliances, but I knew she wasn't really asking because she didn't understand, she was asking because she had no idea how to escape what she saw. "It's done, Emily," I said, keeping my voice even despite the storm of emotions tearing through me, determined not to let her see me break just yet. "I know about Theo, the affair, the lies you've been feeding me about business trips and late nights, all of it is right here in front of you." She shook her head, her hands shaking as she picked up one of the screenshots, her eyes scanning the words she couldn't deny. "Marcus, this isn't what you think it is," she said, her voice cracking as she tried to find a foothold. "I can explain everything if you just listen." I laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the air between us, and took a step toward her, my anger finally spilling out after days of holding it in. "Explain how you've been sleep with another guy for months?" I asked, not caring how raw my words sounded. "Explain how you looked me in the eye every day and lied about where you were, who you were with, while I was here thinking we were fine." Tears started rolling down her cheeks, but I didn't feel any sympathy, not after everything I had pieced together over the last week. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, her voice breaking as she clutched the screenshot tighter. "Theo and it just happened, Marcus, I didn't plan it, I didn't want it to get this far." I stared at her, unable to believe she thought that made it better, and my hands clenched into fists at my sides as I fought to keep my voice from shaking. "You didn't want it to get this far?" I repeated, each word sharp and deliberate. "You didn't want to cheat on me, to throw our marriage away, to let everyone I know see that video and laugh at how stupid I've been?" She flinched, her shoulders hunching as if she could make herself smaller, but I wasn't done, not even close. "My coworkers, my friends, my students, they've all seen it, Emily," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. "They've all been talking about it, wondering how I didn't notice my wife was with someone else." "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her face a mess of tears and guilt, but the words sounded hollow after everything she had done. "I was going to stop it, I swear I was, I just didn't know how." I shook my head, cutting her off before she could keep digging herself deeper. "When were you going to stop?" I asked, my tone cold and hard. "After your next trip? After you and Theo had another weekend away while I sat here like an idiot?" She didn't answer, just stood there crying, and I took another step closer, lowering my voice to a level that felt dangerous even to me. "Why did you do it, Emily?" I asked, needing to hear it even though I knew it would hurt. "What made you decide I wasn't enough?" She looked up at me, her eyes swollen and red, and her voice came out so soft I had to strain to catch it. "I felt like I didn't matter," she said, wiping at her face with trembling hands. "You were always working, always with your students, and I needed someone who noticed me, who made me feel like I was still here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing, couldn't process that she was trying to turn this around on me, and I took a step back, my jaw tightening as I fought the urge to yell. "So, it's my fault because I was trying to keep us afloat?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with disbelief. "Because I was working to give us a life, you went out and sleep with someone else?" She shook her head quickly, reaching for me, but I jerked away, her touch feeling like a burn I couldn't stand. "No, it's not your fault," she said, desperation creeping into her words. "It's mine, I know that, I made a horrible mistake, but I love you, Marcus, I never stopped loving you." I let out a bitter laugh, stepping back again to put more space between us. "You don't love someone and do this to them," I said, my voice flat and final. "You don't lie and cheat and then expect them to buy it when you say you care." "Please," she begged, her hands outstretched as she tried to close the distance I kept making. "We can fix this, we can go to therapy, anything you want, just don't give up on us." I shook my head, my decision already made, and looked her straight in the eye so she couldn't miss what came next. "I want a divorce," I said, the words heavy but certain, cutting through her sobs like a blade. She froze, her mouth opening but no sound coming out, and I could see she hadn't thought I'd go that far. "Marcus, no," she whispered, sinking to her knees as her crying turned into something louder. "Messier. We can still make it work, please don't do this." I turned away, unable to watch her fall apart when she was the one who broke us, and started walking toward the hall. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight," I said, my voice empty now. "Tomorrow, I'll figure out where I'm going, you can stay here for now." She called after me, her voice hoarse and pleading, but I didn't stop, didn't look back, just shut the guest room door and leaned against it, letting the weight of the night settle over me. The marriage I had believed in was gone, torn apart by her choices, and as I lay down on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, I knew this wasn't the end, not yet, not with Theo still out there and the mess she'd left me to clean up. I sat at my desk with my laptop open, the screen's light spilling across the room while the house stayed silent around me. Emily was gone again, claiming another work trip, but I'd stopped believing her excuses long ago. My hands rested above the keys, steady even though anger pulsed deep inside me, no longer wild but focused into something sharper. This wasn't about losing control anymore, it was about taking it back. I'd spent days digging into Theo Granger's life, piecing together his NFT scam, and now I had enough to make him pay, and Emily along with him. I knew I couldn't unravel Theo's mess alone, so I decided to lean on someone who could help without asking too many questions. Alex, one of my students, came to mind, a kid with a knack for tech who'd once bragged about outsmarting the school's security system. During class the next day, I pulled him aside, keeping my voice light and my story simple. "Alex, I'm putting together a lesson on online scams for the debate team, could use some research help if you're up for it." He grinned, eager to show off, and I handed him a note with Theo's name and a few details about NFTs and shady deals, asking him to dig around without making it personal. He didn't need to know why I cared. By the following afternoon, Alex dropped a folder on my desk, packed with screenshots, transaction logs, and posts from obscure forums tying Theo to fake accounts and inflated sales. It was more than I'd expected, a roadmap to his ruin, and I thanked Alex with a nod and a promise of extra credit before sending him off, still unaware of what he'd handed me. Alone again, I opened my laptop and drafted an email to a journalist I'd found online, someone who'd built a name exposing frauds like Theo. I attached Alex's files and typed a short note: "Theo Granger's running a scam through his NFT business, here's the evidence, use it if you want." My finger hovered over the send button, pulse racing, but when I clicked it, a quiet calm washed over me, like the first step was finally done. The story hit the internet a few days later, spreading fast, headlines about Theo's collapse, sponsors bailing, his accounts going silent as the mess grew. I followed it all from my phone, scrolling through updates while a slow satisfaction built inside me, knowing I'd lit the fuse. But Emily was still in play, and I wasn't stopping until she felt it too. She'd been careless, using her work email to talk to Theo, leaving threads I could pull apart. One night, while she was out, I opened her laptop, her password unchanged, a rookie move, and found the messages, proof of her tie to him. I forwarded a batch to her boss, tweaking the settings so it looked like she'd sent them herself, attaching client data she'd never meant to share with a subject line that read, "Urgent, client data leak." Then I logged out and waited. Her job didn't last the week. She came home Friday night, face drained of color, and sank onto the couch, hands pressed against her forehead. "They fired me, Marcus," she said, her voice barely holding together. "Someone sent emails from my account, private stuff, things I didn't touch. I don't know how it happened." I leaned against the doorway, watching her unravel, saying nothing while she stumbled through explanations that didn't add up. She didn't look at me like I'd done it, still seeing me as the husband too distracted to fight back, and I let her keep that illusion for now. Theo bailed on her soon after, his own world crashing too hard to prop her up. She tried calling him, leaving messages that went nowhere. I caught one from the hall, her voice breaking as she said, "Theo, just tell me what's happening, please, I need to know you're okay." The line went quiet, and her sobs filtered through the door, sharp and desperate. I stood there, listening, part of me wondering if I should feel something for her, some echo of the life we'd had, but that was gone, drowned out by the truth she'd buried under her lies. She'd chosen this, and I'd made sure it cost her. A couple days later, she found me in the kitchen, eyes swollen and voice raw. "Marcus, I know we're not okay, but I need you, I'm losing everything, my job, Theo, all of it. Can we talk, please?" I set my coffee down, meeting her gaze with a steadiness that surprised me. "What do you expect me to say, Emily? That I'll clean up your mess? That I feel bad your affair fell apart?" She recoiled, tears spilling again, and tried to argue. "It was a mistake, I get that, but I'm sinking here, I don't know where to turn." My voice stayed even, cutting through her plea. "You should have figured that out before you lied to me, you're alone in this now." She grabbed for my arm, but I pulled away, walking out while her cries faded behind me, the gap between us too wide to mend. That night, lying in bed with the house silent again, I stared at the ceiling, waiting for relief that didn't come. I'd taken her down, stripped away what she'd built on top of me, and it felt right in a way, gave me a grip on my life I hadn't had since I found out. But there was an ache too, a hollow space where something used to be, and I couldn't ignore it. Destroying her didn't fix what she'd broken, it just left me standing in the rubble. Still, I wasn't done. One more talk was coming, a chance to say what I needed and walk away clean. She didn't see it yet, but I did, and when it happened, I'd be ready. I stood in the living room, my eyes tracing the familiar outlines of furniture that once felt like ours but now seemed like relics of someone else's life. The couch where we'd watched movies, the coffee table stained with rings from late-night talks, they were all still here, unchanged, yet everything about them felt distant, like I was looking through a stranger's window. I'd been moving through the days on autopilot, teaching classes, dodging questions from colleagues, pretending I was fine, but every quiet moment brought me back to this room, to the conversation I knew was coming. Emily would be here soon. I'd called her yesterday, told her we needed to settle things, and her voice had trembled with a mix of fear and hope that I didn't have the energy to unravel. My hands flexed at my sides, restless, as I waited for the sound of her key in the lock. She still had one, though I wasn't sure why I hadn't asked for it back. The past few weeks had been a storm inside me, emotions churning through stages I couldn't always name. Now, standing here, I felt something closer to clarity, not calm, not forgiveness, but a hard-earned understanding that I couldn't keep living in the wreckage she'd left behind. I heard the door creak open, and my shoulders tensed as Emily stepped inside, her coat hanging loose on her frame, her face pale and drawn like she hadn't slept in days. "Hey," she said, her voice thin and uncertain, and I nodded, motioning her toward the couch while I stayed near the bookshelf, needing the space between us. She sat down, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve, and the silence stretched out, heavy with everything we hadn't said since the last time we'd fought. I watched her, taking in the way she avoided my gaze, the way her shoulders curled inward like she was bracing for a blow. "Marcus, I've been thinking a lot," she started, her words rushing out as if she'd rehearsed them. "I know I messed up, God, I know that more than you can imagine, and I hate myself for it. But I keep wondering if there's a way we can get past this, if we can try again." Her eyes flicked up to mine, pleading, and I felt a flicker of something, pity, maybe, or just exhaustion, but it wasn't enough to sway me. "You think we can just move past it?" I asked, my voice low and steady, though my chest tightened with the effort of keeping it that way. "You slept with him, Emily. You lied to me for months. And now you want me to act like it's something we can fix with a few therapy sessions?" Her face crumpled, but she pressed on, leaning forward as if closing the distance could change my mind. "It wasn't about you," she said, her voice breaking. "It was me being stupid, selfish, lost, I don't even know. But I love you, Marcus. I've always loved you, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." I shook my head, the words I'd been holding on to slipping out before she could say more. "Love doesn't mean what it used to, not after this. You didn't just hurt me, you broke everything we had, and I can't keep pretending there's something left to save. I've spent too long wondering where you were, who you were with, and I'm done living like that." She flinched, her hands gripping the edge of the couch, and I could see the tears welling up, but I kept going, needing her to hear it all. "This isn't a marriage anymore. It's a trap, and I'm not staying in it." Emily stood up then, her movements jerky, and took a step toward me, her voice rising with a desperation I hadn't heard before. "So that's it? You're just giving up? After everything we've been through, you're walking away because of one mistake?" I held her gaze, unflinching, and let the truth settle between us. "It wasn't one mistake, Emily. It was a choice you made, over and over, every time you went to him, every time you lied to my face. And yeah, I'm walking away, because I deserve better than this. She stopped, her breath hitching, and for a moment, neither of us moved, the weight of my words filling the room like smoke. Then she sank back onto the couch, her hands covering her face as she whispered, "What happens now? Divorce?" I nodded, the decision solid and unshakable. "Yes. I've already started the process. You'll get the papers soon." She let out a choked sob, her shoulders shaking, and part of me wanted to look away, to escape the sight of her breaking down, but I stayed where I was. "Marcus, please," she said, her voice muffled by her hands. "Don't do this. I'll change, I swear. I'll do whatever you want." I turned toward the window, staring out at the backyard where we'd once planned to build a patio, a project we'd never gotten around to. "It's too late for that," I said quietly. "You can't undo what's done, and I can't keep punishing myself by holding on. I need to let go for me, not for you." She cried harder, the sound raw and jagged, and I felt the familiar ache in my chest, but it was different now, less about her and more about the life I was leaving behind. After a while, she stood up, wiping her face with her sleeve, and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Did you ever really love me?" she asked, her voice so soft I almost missed it. I turned back to her, the question cutting deeper than I expected, and answered with the honesty I owed myself. "I loved you more than I knew how to handle. That was the problem, I gave too much, and I didn't see what it was costing me until now." She nodded, a small, broken gesture, and grabbed her coat, her hands trembling as she pulled it on. "I guess that's all there is to say," she murmured, and I opened the door for her, stepping aside as she walked out. "Goodbye, Emily," I said, my tone firm but not cold, and she didn't look back, her figure disappearing down the steps into the dusk. I shut the door and leaned against it, the silence rushing back in, but it felt different now, less oppressive, more like a beginning. The marriage was over, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, stirring a pot of soup on the stove, the steam rising in lazy curls that fogged up the window above the sink. The place still felt temporary, with unpacked boxes lining the walls and a table I'd bought secondhand wobbling under the weight of my laptop and a stack of ungraded papers I hadn't touched in weeks. It had been 4 months since Emily left, 4 months since I'd watched her pack the last of her things into a suitcase and walk out without a backward glance, leaving me to figure out what to do with the wreckage of our marriage. I'd sold the house we'd shared, split the savings down the middle, and moved here, a smaller space, closer to the school where I taught, though I hadn't been back since taking a leave of absence. The quiet was different now, not heavy with her absence but open, like a blank page waiting for me to decide what to write. I'd spent the first few weeks after the divorce wandering, not physically but mentally, replaying every moment of our last year together, trying to pinpoint where it all went wrong. Eventually, I'd stopped looking for answers in the past and started filling the days with something else. I'd picked up woodworking, a hobby I'd abandoned years ago, and spent hours in a rented workshop sanding down planks of oak until my hands ached and my mind settled. There was something satisfying about shaping something solid, something that didn't shift or betray you, and I'd built a bookshelf that now stood against the living room wall, half filled with books I'd kept from the old house. I wasn't ready to go back to teaching yet, but I'd started tutoring a few kids online, guiding them through chemistry problems over video calls, and it kept me connected to the part of myself I still recognized. One evening, I was wiping down the counter after dinner when my phone lit up with a call from Jake, a colleague from school who'd been nudging me to rejoin the world. I answered, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder as I dried my hands on a towel, and his voice came through, warm and insistent. "Marcus, you free tomorrow? Some of us are grabbing drinks, nothing big, just a chance to catch up." I hesitated, the reflex to say no rising fast, but then I thought about the empty hours stretching ahead and nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Yeah, I'll come," I said, and he laughed, sounding relieved. "Good man. See you at 7. When I hung up, I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone, surprised by how normal it felt to agree, how the idea of sitting with people who knew me before everything fell apart didn't sting as much as it used to. The next night, I walked into the bar, a low-key place with wooden tables and dim lighting, and spotted Jake at a booth with 2 other teachers I'd worked with for years. They waved me over, and I slid into the seat across from them, feeling the chatter wash over me as they talked about school budget cuts, a new principal, the usual complaints. "How are you holding up, Marcus?" Jake asked during a lull, his tone casual but his eyes sharp, and I shrugged, sipping my beer to buy a second before answering. "Getting there," I said, and it wasn't a lie. Been keeping busy, built a bookshelf, started tutoring. It's not exciting, but it's something. He nodded, leaning back in his seat. That's more than most people manage after a mess like that. You're tougher than you look. I smiled, a small one, but it felt real, and the conversation shifted to lighter things, leaving me to listen and nod, grateful for the ease of it. Later, walking home under a sky streaked with clouds, I thought about what Jake had said, tougher than I looked, and wondered if that was true. I didn't feel tough, I felt patched together, like the bookshelf I'd made, sturdy enough but still rough around the edges. Emily's leaving had carved out a space in me I hadn't known was there, but instead of filling it with regret, I was starting to fill it with things I chose: wood and nails, equations explained to kids who actually listened, nights like this where I could sit with friends and not feel like a ghost. I passed a corner store, its lights buzzing faintly, and on impulse, I went in and bought a notebook, the kind with a plain black cover, thinking maybe I'd start jotting down ideas again, not just about chemistry but about what I'd learned these past months. When I got back to the apartment, I set the notebook on the table and poured a glass of water, standing by the window as I drank it, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. My phone buzzed, a text from Jake, saying it was good to see me out, and I typed back a quick thanks, feeling the weight of the day settle into something manageable. I didn't have it all figured out, and maybe I never would, but I was here, in this moment, and that was enough to keep going. Tomorrow, I'd sand down another piece of wood, or call up a student who needed help with balancing equations, and bit by bit, I'd build something new, not perfect, but mine.